Hello, and thank you all for joining us for the first RNCM Insights of Summer 2021. I am delighted to be here talking to one of the college's international chairs in violin, Henning Kraggerud. As well as being a world-renowned violinist, Henning is a prolific composer and arranger and also performs on the viola. Today we will be discussing his role as the artistic director of the Arctic Philharmonic Chamber Orchestra, alongside other elements of his multidisciplinary musical career. How are you today, Henning?
I'm very fine, thanks for asking. It's fantastic to be invited here to do this talk. I'm looking so much forward.
Brilliant, thank you. To start off, can I ask you, have performing and composing and arranging always been of equal importance to you throughout your life and career, or did you think that one might eventually supersede the other?
Well, it's a very, very good question. I'm fortunate enough to do all of these things and also do quite a bit of improvising, which is very much linked for me both to the composing part and to the playing part. So I was lucky enough when I was a little boy that we had a piano in our living room, and I would sit down by the piano and just hit random keys, and I loved the black keys and the pedal to keep sustain, and I would make small melodies, and pretty soon I started to do that on the violin and viola as well. And so my first teacher, Magna Halvorsen, also encouraged this. So after I had done my sort of normal lessons, she would serve me cake and ice cream, and then I would play my newest composition for her or with her, and then we would discuss how school was. So for me, I got sort of the ideal introduction to playing violin, and as part of that also the playing and composing and improvising. So at some stage I felt that attacked, so I have had to keep fighting for this creative side, because part of the sort of educational system is not really stimulating this. It's not being asked for, but we can talk more about that later.
Brilliant. Well, seeing as they are intrinsically linked, how does composing and improvisation impact upon the way you perform, and vice versa?
Well, first of all, one reason I like to improvise, and there is many, is to get my sort of spirit in synchronization with the body. So I feel present at the moment. Sometimes I can wake up in the morning and be stressed about something, thinking about what's going ahead or looking backwards, but I don't feel at ease. And then either on the piano or on the violin or viola, I would start to improvise to get in touch with sort of myself. At some stage, when I then play and I feel present in my own life, then I feel ready to sort of start normal practicing. And then it is a different type of practicing from what I would have done and also often did before, when I sort of didn't find a way out of stress in the same way. So for me, there is two main enemies in life, and this is stress, and it is also perfectionism. And by that I mean the perfectionism of the surface of things. So I also use improvisation and composing as a way to sort of get into the actual music I'm going to playing, to make it my own. Whether it's made by Mozart or Bach or any other composer, I want to be sort of co-creator of that piece. And actually Johann Sebastian Bach had a fantastic advice to his students. He said, you should take out the main chords and harmonic progression and make your own composition and make your own improvisation over this. And if you haven't tried that, you can start with a fairly sort of simple movement. You find the first chord, and then there is a lot of ornamentation, and then there is a dominant chord, a subdominant chord. And if you start to make your own little melodies with that, or pick different ornamentation, once you then return back to, say, if it's still Bach we are talking about, it will feel also the pleasure of how wonderful he has composed it, but also knowing it's not the only option. And for those of you listening who are a violinist, of course, we have the B minor partita by Bach, where you also have these double movements. So you can see how Bach did it himself with a movement. So you could try to compose your own little double to maybe the sarabande or some of the easier movements there. And so this way is how I found was actually the fastest way to practice. Because when I was maybe 16, 17, 18 years old, I stopped sadly for a while to play so much piano because I thought I would waste my time and I needed to practice my next concert and I was all stressed up. But now I found if I sit down actually first by the piano when I learn a new piece and I get to know the chords and I get to love the score and love several parts of the score, then I actually have a story to tell. And when I already have a story to tell before I pick up the wooden piece and put it under my shin, then I have much more focus and fun in the practicing. So I've sort of redefined for myself the word practicing is anything you do to bring you closer to your dreams. And for me, I try now to make composing, playing, everything closer to each other rather than to be separate disciplines. So I would even go in and out. So I'm in the middle of practicing Sibelius violin concerto. If I then get stressed about some perfectionism, oh, I need this six to be in tune, and then I start to improvise around this until I'm again in synchronization. And at some stage, I actually just want to hit that sixth because it's a wonderful chord, and then I hit it. So then the intonation, if you have done the work, I don't want to second doubt myself with thinking it could always be more clean. It could always, because that devil whispering in my ear, I definitively have a mission to not feed.
You mentioned there that stress and perfectionism are two major difficulties to work around. I suppose another thing for someone with so many disciplines is balancing your schedule. How do you organise yourself, and do you have any tips on how best to do so?
First of all, you should talk with my wife, and she would probably confirm that I'm not very organized at all. But what I do recommend all of you, find something which is really, really important for you, for your heart, and make sure that you are doing something for your dream every day. Some days, of course, you won't have so much time, but I have this question I ask myself before I go to bed. What have I done today to reach further to my dreams? And if I cannot find anything, I will think that I've wasted the day. So I want then, I also have two things I remind myself every morning when I get up. And this is very, very simple, but still I need to remind myself every single day, and it works. I remind myself that life can always be meaningful. And even though I don't believe in all of the church we have built around classical music, I still believe in classical music more than ever. So there are frustrations, there are things in the education system, in the concert life, things which doesn't work. But once I find what I love in the music, it is actually some of the things I love most in life. So meaningfulness is what you can actually replace, because it's very close to perfectionism. So how can you fight perfectionism? For me, it's always possible to look for meaning and find meaning when you are practicing. Most of our life are actually practicing, not concerts. So I want every hour of practicing to be meaningful. So I'm looking for meaning. And the good thing about that, if you find something meaningful, even if you they don't manage to do it exactly how we want, it's still meaningful. So while this perfectionism thing, I've actually even invented ways to practice to not be perfectionistic. I don't know all of you, but if you have ever studied a piece really, really hard, say a Bach fugue or something like that, and you think you know it, and then you decide to play through it. And after 3 bars, you do a major mistake. You play totally out of tune, the wrong chord or something. One part of you would probably think, oh, now it's meaningless. I need to stop and start from the beginning again. And then it happens after 17 bars or something like that. Don't stop. Remind yourself what you love about the piece, what you have found, maybe if you try by the piano or something, things you know now, you are sure you think is meaningful. And the shorter time it goes from the perfectionism part of yourself is condemning yourself to eternal suffering until you find back meaning. This is practicing meaningfulness instead of perfectionism. So I'm very happy with myself if I manage to forget that I've done a mistake and enjoy the music. And the shorter that can happen, the better. So that could be advice. Try to decide in advance how much you're going to play through. Don't stop when you do something you are not proud of, but look for what you are loving, and that will help in the next concert.
Speaking of concerts, I understand that you have collaborated with authors, actors and philosophers and sometimes use artwork as a backdrop to recordings. Can you tell us more about how this crossover enhances the performance experience?
Well, I'm always looking for win-win situations. So when I become artistic director of Arctic Philharmonic Orchestra, I had more power in sort of scheduling than I've ever had before with the orchestra. And then I could do something about part of the church we have built around classical music I don't like, which is too little rehearsal time. So you have, say, a big program, 1.5 hours, and this many rehearsals, and you try as much as you can, and you're stressed out. So I found out how if I could practice with my orchestra for half of the program instead. And then I needed to fill the other half. And then what else do I love in life? And I love literature. So I invited some of my favorite authors to collaborate. So the good thing is this also started to inspire the orchestra and they inspired the audience, who turned out liked better to hear a concert, not wall-to-wall music the whole time, but sort of literature, music in between each other. So this is a typical win-win situation. So whenever I encounter a problem, I try to find what is the resource in this situation. So the resource when you have too little rehearsal time is that you have to think differently. So part of the solution, we got more rehearsal time, and then unexpected maybe at that time, the benefit also was a massive inspiration both for the audience and for the players. So I can very much recommend, and it can work with a lot of different types of art. And also I quite often when I do my concerts, as those of you who have heard me in Manchester know, that I also talk with the audience. This is partly to tell stories about the music they're about to hear, but it's also to get to know the audience before I play. So I found out that while talking about the music and maybe saying something funny and the audience would laugh or contact, then also the storyteller in me was awakened. And this also fights perfectionism. So it's easier to sort of tell a story musically after that for me. But everybody's different. So, but if you haven't tried it, try it. I very often sort of tell fairy tales to my children as well. I have 3 children. And I also think this closer to what it is to be playing. I think our job description could very well be that we are storytellers. So I'm sort of treasure hunting in scores to find really, really good stories to tell.
You mentioned becoming artistic director of the Arctic Philharmonic Chamber Orchestra. What would you say is the greatest advantage of directing from the violin in the absence of a conductor?
Well, for me, I'm not a good conductor. So I found that a musician can read my body language when I'm playing much better than when I'm trying to conduct. So for me, that was sort of, I act better as a conductor when I'm playing than when I'm sort of self-conscious trying to find out how to conduct. So, but I know, of course, a lot of my friends are brilliant conductors who can, show everything with their hands. Since I cannot do that as well as I would like to, I've actually invented other ways when I'm actually conducting a little bit also. So try to find what is the resource of being a really bad conductor. for instance, the resource of being a really bad pianist is that when I compose a piece, I frequently hit the wrong chord. And every now and then it's a nicer chord than I had in my head, and then I write it down. So I can benefit from being a bad piano player. But also, since I couldn't really conduct very well with my orchestra in Tromsø, I started to invent some sort of kindergarten games. So I would make all of the musicians maybe clap 1 and 2 and 3 and, raise them up to dance or sing, and I invented other ways of explaining how I felt about the music, which turned out to work very well, which is, fairly uncommon for in classical music. And I remember when I was guest leading the Halle Orchestra, the former concertmaster, she told me that during her 25 years or something like that, she had never ever danced and sung in a rehearsal. But I got them to do it. So I think my quest is sort of try to get classical music live to be less conservative and try new things. And the interesting thing is with rubato, for instance, if you want the orchestra to do quite advanced type of rubato, it actually helps these kindergarten games with clapping and dancing. It's actually not difficult to get a whole orchestra to be part of that, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. But at once they put up the violins and instruments and started to play, I get less contact. And what does that tell about the practicing? That I can get easy contact with them doing kindergarten games, but it's like a wall between me when they start to play. So it is to sort of, my mission in Arctic Philharmonic has been to sort of learn whatever we have been learning, which prevent us from doing spontaneous things which we could do in kindergarten, but has systematically been robbed from us due to normal schooling and, do as your teachers say. And there is a mentality in the education, I think, which is not getting people free enough. I think we have overemphasized the part of the analytic brain. So what every 3 and 4-year-olds know, somehow we manage to forget some during our practicing. So try to introduce really, really new ways of practicing anything you do, singing, dancing, conducting, studying by the piano, anything which bring you closer to what is important for your heart is practicing for me.
You performed in 2017 the Johann Halvorson's violin concerto for the first time. Well, not you, but it was being performed for the first time in over 100 years. How do you approach lesser or unknown works and bring them back to the forefront?
Yes, it is actually not so very different from when I learn a very known piece. So I would any time just look at the scores, piano reduction if it exists. I'd sit down by the piano, look for what is nice here. In my toolbox, I would look for phrase lengths, rhythms, melodies, harmonic progressions. And I think I'm ready to start to practice when I've found things I love, maybe several things for each bar. And then I just let my focus sort of switch between them. So when practicing a piece which there isn't a recording on, you cannot hear it on Spotify. Of course, then it's extra useful to get to know really the harmonic material before your first rehearsal with orchestra. So you can get away with maybe playing a piece which is really well known because you can get it sort of in through the air. But in order to pick a good fingering and good bowing and some choices there, I think to really understand the harmonic sort of universe it is from, at least inspires me a lot. But that being said, he was such a good violinist, Johan Halvorsen, so I was also swearing a lot while practicing it. So
Not an easy piece then.
No.
No.
Unless you sort of like to eat sort of octaves for breakfast. So
Okay, I get the idea. Yeah. At this point, I'd like to see if anyone else on the Zoom conversation or anyone watching on the Facebook live stream has anything that they'd like to type in on the Facebook live stream, or raise your hand if you're on Zoom. Whilst you're doing that, I'll ask another question. Do you think that being from a Norwegian background that has influenced your own output as a performer or composer, or not necessarily?
Well, it has certainly influenced me. So my mother always sung Norwegian sort of songs for me, tucking me into bed, and I was exposed to a lot of culture, heard a lot of folk music, and this part is very close to my heart. So before I started really to use improvisation, I also used to just play songs I had in my head from my childhood. I even made a recording with a jazz pianist, Bugge Wesseltoft, with improvisations over Norwegian folk songs and a little bit more. So it is very close to my heart. But one thing I would like to say, that I play Edvard Grieg's music with musicians from all over the world, and it's not like the Norwegians are the ones who play it the best necessarily. We have fantastic pianists around the world, and I remember playing Grieg with Denis Varion, the Hungarian pianist, for instance, and I just love when somebody has a radically different take. So this tradition, anytime when people think, oh, a Finnish conductor would know Sibelius best, I don't believe that. So I think there is something in music, and a good pianist not knowing as much of the Norwegian folk music can maybe see behind something obvious and find a different treasure.
I can't see any hands. Have we got any questions? Here we go. Pierre is asking, is there a way how you could get into character or a particular mindset before performing? I sometimes find it difficult to create the correct energy needed if my current mood is not corresponding.
Yes, it's a very good question. So there is several ways, and I love the phrasing also, get into character. So for instance, if I'm playing a Mozart violin concerto, I think opera. So I play sort of and think, what would the text, the singers, or the plot in this opera be? And I also do this type of things with other music. So, and if you haven't tried, I would also very much encourage you to improvise sort of in the vicinity of the piece you are going to play. This is another way, it's sort of to get into character. So, but I like that. In a way, we are singers, dancers, actors when we are playing, and to get into character is actually to reconnect with what you think the music is about, and this is up to all of you to decide, of course. But for me, what prevents me usually would be if I'm too stressful. So if you aren't in, I have a lot of students now, and if you aren't into improvisation and feel a little bit intimidated by not having tried that, you could try playing sort of a song, you know, in your heart, or even just play one note and start to vary with different types of vibrato, and try, can you get in touch with your feelings and let your feelings be heard through the sound? And this is a good way, but there are other ways. So if there is, right before a concert, say you are doubting yourself or something, there is actually some tricks I have up my sleeve. So I would say that if there is a mirror in the room and you try to look yourself into the eyes in the mirror while playing, there are parts of our brain which are so ancient in the stem of the brain, which is akin to maybe reptiles and other things, who doesn't understand the concept of mirrors at all. So if you manage to keep eye contact while playing, by definition, that part of your brain are in control and are confident. You are not the one running away, neither is the other one in the mirror, of course, but this part of your brain doesn't know about this concept. And this can also be good because once you start to speak to yourself, that part of the brain doesn't know. It's like a dog barking to the mirror, not understanding it itself. So this can also be a way. Of course, it could easily, if you do it every day, 10 hours a day, it could lead to narcissism. But I think this is, of course, a little bit a joke. But for me, it actually, even a reflective part of a window, if it's dark outside or anything, to get in contact just with another person, it seems like, then telling the story helps me to get into character. But other times, if there is a piano there, I could go put actually the violin down, sit down, play a few chords, try to sing the theme. If there isn't a piano, I will try to dance the theme. And this is particularly liberating, I think, because it's part of stiffness when playing for me. If I dance the theme, I can also get rid of hindrances to get into character. Yes, did we get another question? Or?
Yes, we've got a question from Kath asking, you have talked about opera and singing. How important is singing as part of your interpretation and freedom of expression and phrasing? How do you transfer your singing to your instrument?
Well, the singing part as the dance part is a way to make actually my body just part of it. And I think for me, even if I don't sing in concerts, the singing means a lot to myself. So when I sing the theme, I bypass sort of the things I have done wrongly by studying. So it's an easy way to get in touch with what I deem my true musicality. Of course, it's probably possible to listen to, do I sing in tune? But I don't care about the singing, hence it works. And this is all part of developing what I call true technique. So technique, how I defined it, is just the ability to express what you feel. If you don't know what you feel, true technique is not possible. Then it's some sort of craftsmanship. But then an easy way to get in touch with how we feel is to sing it or dance it. It also works if you are in a train to think it, because sometimes when I forget myself and start to dancing or sing, and you get a bit strange glances. So, but I have survived so far.
Like that, I can imagine that. Can we ask Chris, what would you like to ask now?
Hi, Henning. Nice to
Hi,
see
Chris.
you. Could you talk to us for a minute about approaching solo bar and how students, and in fact how all of us, can find our own personal interpretation, and also what your response is to so-called authenticity, and what your approach is on that one?
Well, the one you should be authentic towards is yourself. So there is many teachers who are well-meaning but still are closing doors, and you will feel sort of less free and less able. They don't necessarily know it, and the good thing is, even if somebody is trying to close the door, nobody could really close it unless you yourself allow it to be closed. So be very skeptical to anybody who says it needs to be this and this way, or this is truth, or you should not do that. So I do as always, I try to find a way to find what is it I love about this piece. And if that leads me to something which is illegal to do at the moment, maybe do vibrato or do more rubato than is fashionable at the time, I will allow myself if that is what I love most. So once I get into this part of practicing where I have something to obtain and something to gain rather than something to avoid. So whenever it feels like I have to avoid, oh, don't rush, don't do vibrato, something I avoid, I need to translate that. What do I really want to do? And then I think I've invented many, many techniques. So it can be what the obstacle could be what the teacher tells you, but it could very well also be what you think the teachers could be telling you. So you're not even waiting for the. So my experience is that many of the sort of challenges I've got, oh, this conductor would probably not like that. It's actually in my head. So if you dare to be yourself, you will be surprised that actually people would probably like it and welcome it. So part of the reasons is also not really daring to do what you do like. But even if you then have a teacher who say, oh, you are not allowed to do it like that, this is the wrong tempo, you need to do that. This is a sort of ruling technique. He's trying to say, like the father of Matilda in this movie, I'm big, you are small, I'm right, you are wrong. Don't believe it. And don't believe it even if he piles up letters saying, oh, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach's, his son said the trills need to be from the top. If you don't feel like it, and it is sort of wrong for you, you can try it, but don't think that you have to do it, because then the world can get narrower and narrower. And my question is also, are we supposed to do it? Even if we know that, let's say we traveled back to Bach's time, and he said he liked it this way, but I didn't like it. Should I then forget what I love about Bach? Are we actually trying to sort of recreate a past? So I would say in popular music, Elvis Presley, Beatles, things like that, it is, if you are singing one of these songs and do exactly the same as Elvis did himself, people would frown upon you and say, oh, copycat, why don't you bring something of your own into this? And I believe Bach would probably do the same. So once you make it your own, you can take this liberty. And every language has the expression to take a liberty. If you wait for somebody to give you that liberty, you can wait a really, really long time. But the good thing, somebody try to close the door for you, you can say, okay, this is his or her opinion. I don't need to follow that. But then how do you have, if you don't then don't know, what is it I love about this? Then again, I play these Bach solo sonatas by the piano when it's fairly simple. And I play it slowly because I'm a bad pianist. And I usually just find things which I find these really beautiful. Then I want to recreate as beautiful things on the violin. But if I only have my violin, I would say in the slow movement of the A minor sonata, which goes in C major, I would play just the top part. And then it suddenly becomes much clearer to me than if I attempted to play both parts. So quite often when I teach my students, I ask them to play either the melody part or the bass part, and I don't tell them how to play at all. So I don't want to corrupt them with my ideas before they have found their own ideas. Then they play the melody, and it's suddenly fantastic. And then I say, well, now we need to keep this, the feeling you have now, which you like, which is coming from your musicality, and not sacrifice that when practicing. So when then doing the double stop, and it starts to be not in tune, maybe the bow plays too strong, something like that. Once you let go of your musicality and get more interested in the surface of the intonation and playing together, then you have sort of lost access to your musicality again. If that happens, I step back again, or just play the bass part of it. In Norwegian, we have an expression which I love, is you should not throw the baby out with the dirty water. Have you that expression in English? So it means that, okay, the water is clearly dirty, and you can get the water clean and you can throw it out, but it would be really bad if the baby is missing after that. Oh, where is the baby? So the baby is your musicality, what you love about the music, which you can easily find just playing the melody part. If during the practice you lose sight of that, and then you play in tune and you play better and better violinistic, but you have lost that, then the practice is what I call not true technique, but sort of false technique. You have become too superficial. It's just the top part. But it's possible to switch that instantly. So and that happens every time I practice. I sort of lose my way into that part of my brain, but then I get back again to parts where I love. But then regarding tempo, for instance, I think also experimentation is really, really good. So quite often with movements by Bach, I would try them in a variety of different tempos, from really, really, really slow to ridiculously fast. And I would discover something new about the piece in another dance. And quite often when I play way too fast, I will find something about the gravity, where it gravitates towards or back from, which I can bring in the slower tempo. And when I play ridiculously slow, I can find sort of beauty and peace in transitions, which I couldn't really notice when I played faster, and I can bring that meaning with me. So experimenting with a lot of different techniques of practicing, but always looking for meaning. And by meaning, I just mean something I enjoy while playing it. And since I know sort of the best concert, there isn't any difference between physical pleasure and emotional pleasure. They meet at the top. So if I feel stiff, I sometimes will say, oh, I want this to feel good. And can also be a way, once it starts to feel good, and I'm not tense any place, and I move around quite often when I do that, then it's also easier to get back in again in contact with what I call the true musicality, which is actually just listening to your own voice. That you change these parameters, and then naturally it will grow various ways to play. But since every hall, every room is different, I don't actually think there is one right way for you even to play a piece by Bach. So when I really know a piece, I have absolutely no plan. I enter stage and I start to play, and then the room, the audience, the hall, everything influence. And what I call the inspiration, which is probably something planted in my consciousness during my practicing earlier, sometimes just offers a new wonderful idea. And this is what I love, not to plan, not to control everything. So there is this Bates, an American, which I always tell in masterclasses. He said that all the best things in life can never be fully controlled, but you can put yourself in a position where they could happen. So it's basically, you have found enough to love, try to get rid of the obstacles, try to be present in your life, and then you tell the story not only for the audience, but also for yourself at the same time.
Thank you, Henning. That's a fantastic answer to a great question, Chris. Thank you.
Yes.
Can we now have Emilio's question?
Hi, thank you, Henning. I wanted to ask about your composition experience. When writing for instruments you don't play, or maybe they are out of your register, you've said this deep connection to emotions and to the human experience, which I love. But how do you get across those ideas when you can't actually hear them by yourself?
Well, it's many different ways. So, but first of all, I quite often actually borrow an instrument. So I have borrowed the cello one summer, and I borrowed the guitar another period when I was composing for those instruments, to get even a physical feeling for the instrument and to get natural inspiration from it. But sometimes it's not possible. And just this week, I'm playing a new arrangement of a piece I made originally for guitar, but now with harp, and I'm not a harp player and I don't know all the pedaling, and I didn't have really time to work on it. So then I did as good as I could with my imagination, and then actually working together with a live harp player and getting feedback and actually testing out maybe what sounded good on the piano sounds too deep or too high when actually played on the harp. And then you can try out different possibilities that way. But sort of behind the orchestration part, I also remember sort of part of the music which is sort of melodic or harmonic, which isn't actually necessarily limited to any instrument, can manifest itself in various ways. So I've actually, as of lately, started to compose in a different way. So I compose for flexible scoring these days. So I have several possible orchestration in my mind while composing from the very beginning. So just this week, I'm in Kristiansand, which has opened up in the south of Norway, playing a a piece I've composed called Romantarctica, which exists in versions for solo piano, piano trio, quintet, 2 soloists and chamber orchestra, 2 soloists and full orchestra, and I did all of that at once while composing. And the interesting thing here is then, because I was doing the instrumentation for way other instruments, that also influenced my piano composing, and the piano composing influenced the others. So there is possibilities for saying, what is your instrument?
Percussion and trumpet.
Exactly. And if you were to play for the violin, coming from percussion and trumpet, you could then bring something in which is not necessarily part of a normal violinist's thinking. And maybe that can influence also the violins in a good way, just because you are not a violinist. So there could be benefits by not knowing the instrument, not going into sort of a idiomatic trap too easily. So I've played a lot of my pieces for pianist with pianist, and they quite often comment that, oh, this is clearly not written by a pianist, but they love some of the things which they think a pianist composer would not have thought of, which is sort of maybe violinist thinking, I don't know. But so whenever there is a situation you feel, oh, I don't know enough about it, try first. Maybe you can borrow a violin and try a little, but also think, maybe there is an asset. Me as a trumpet player and percussion player can think of something for the violin which no violinist could ever have done. So yes.
Next, we've got a question from Franca. She asks, when I am singing a phrase before practicing it, I realise that I often see in my head what is physically, technically happening on my violin, even if I don't want to. However, when I manage to sing and completely forget the technical and violin aspects of the phrase, I get way better results. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Oh, I'm very happy. This is, I mean, it took me years to find out what you said in your question here. It seems like you're completely on the right track. And I think when you manage this, then your inner ear knows what you want to achieve, and this is why you play better. But if you, while singing, as you said in the beginning of the question, even then are trapped a little bit by the idiomatics of your instrument and think about that, up the game. So try to sing and dance it at the same time. The wonderful thing about humans are that we have a very limited simultaneous capacity. So if you sing it, dance it, at some time, some stage, there won't be any room for your own instrument left in your brain, and then you can sort of be the part. So this is one part up the game. If the phrase involves harmony, it's also possible to neither sing it, nor dance it, nor play it on your instrument, but just play the accompaniment or something resembling it vaguely, and see, can you actually think the melody? And I do believe that you can never play better than you can think, but there are ways you can learn yourself to think much better than you can play, and that shortens the gap so you can really advance on your instrument much quicker. It seems like you are sort of totally into it already, so don't allow yourself to forget it, and make sure you find ways to do this every day. What I usually tell students is that if you practice 1 hour, and this singing can be part of the practicing as well, but if you practice 1 hour and you love the piece more after that 1 hour, and you also think it's easier to play, then your practice has been good. If you like the piece a little bit less and find it has become a bit more difficult to play, that just means the practicing has not been as good as it could be. So it's fairly simple. The other thing is, if you find now, especially in Corona times, can be challenging, but if you find your life to be a bit meaningless, it is probably because it is meaningless, then look for meaning. And usually you just find what you are looking for. So if you don't find meaning while practicing, it just tells me you haven't practicing in a meaningful way. But if you really look for ways to express yourself, even in lockdown without the possibility of playing concerts, it's possible to find meaning. Life can always be meaningful. And just because this situation the last year has been more difficult than ever, it's actually also opportunity. So if we then can learn how to find it in such situation, that can be a great asset later in life. So there are possibilities within the current situation which weren't there when the world moved normally. And I'm sure a lot of them can be used to your advantage. And here, what helps me is focusing technique. So if I am 97% frustrated, that means I'm 3% not frustrated. And by focusing on those 3% which are not frustrated and starting to unwind in that direction, you can actually make that grow until hopefully you are only 3% frustrated during the end of that practicing. So everything is very sort of relative. So now I strayed far away from the question, but anyway, keep singing, try dancing, and any liberating technique. The only thing I would say, if you are not satisfied with how you play, then don't practice exactly the same way as you have played. Try to change parameters, and if you think it becomes more meaningful and you feel more happy, that means you're practicing slightly better. So, but the reason I want to say that quite clearly is that for years I sort of thought, oh, I just have to practice more, and I kept practicing equally bad, and I didn't get better results. So you don't get the result you want in 1 hour of practicing. Stop practicing that way, find a different way of practicing, then it's more meaningful and enjoyable, then you're on the right track.
I think if there's anything we need to take away from today is finding there's that meaningful aspect in everything we're doing. Otherwise,
yes.
There's not much point otherwise. Next, we've got a question from Audrey. Do you have any advice for creating a unique interpretation of a very well-known piece, like a famous concerto which an audience will have heard many times before?
Yes, first of all, it helps immensely if you actually love that piece. So if it's a piece you don't like yourself, or you think is a little bit indifferent, you must look for things you really like until you find it. And then, if you then find it, that means you do something very different from what other have done, because you didn't previously like that piece. So it's possible even when you don't like a piece. But if you take a piece you really love, like Beethoven's Violin Concerto, I grew up with the Oistrakh recording and I love it. And he plays it wonderful, and the Kreisel cadenza, and it's fantastic. First time I started to learn it, I tried to sort of play a little bit like Oistrakh, and I didn't manage, and I was frustrated. But then when I was looking at the score without the violin, looking at the different ideas, and then I decided to compose a cadenza myself. And why would I compose a cadenza when Chrysler has the best cadenza ever? Well, that gave me a chance to improvise over all of the ideas and motifs. And slowly it began to evolve a different way of thinking. And I found ways of the music to move, which gave me pleasure, a different pleasure from what I had from Oistrakh. And now this actually corrupted me. So I still love the Oistrakh way, but I also love the ways I found myself. So it becomes more and more important for me to play it the way I liked it most, and the various versions of that. And so by spending that time looking for your own sort of sense of telling something important for you while you are playing, this will grow naturally. But what I do not recommend necessarily is to try to play different from everybody else, because different in itself, that can also be just weird and strange, and it needs to come from your heart. But once you find the seed here, oh, maybe it could go twice as fast. Maybe it is nicer than, and you start to look into this. Or maybe it shouldn't be one tempo through the movement, maybe it should vary. You start to get ideas, build on. So think about it as a map, and it's a map for meaningful and love of a piece. You want to start a new piece, and you want to love the entire piece as much as you can. Then you find 2 bars here, which you love this way, 2 bars here, and then the fewer places which are left sort of white on the map, but are actually inhabited by your feelings, the more you own the piece. And then the courage part of it is, if one of your ideas are radically different, it takes some courage to sort of present it. I was always bored by the last movement of the third violin concerto by Mozart, for instance. I didn't like it. I thought it was absolutely boring. But then I started to practice it, and I thought, maybe it should be 2 and 2 bars. And I remember first time I brought that to orchestra, I got complaints from the musicians in the orchestra, and they said, this is way too fast. You cannot play it like that. And I didn't give up the idea. And after sort of rehearsing, you can play it. So anything you like is possible. If you can hear it in your head, it is possible. Janacek, for instance, was attacked by the flute players when he composed the Sinfonietta, and they say it's absolutely impossible to play these scales, which is there. And Janacek replied, no, it's not impossible. I heard it in my head. And these days, all flute player plays it without any problem. So believe in your thoughts, fight for them. But the treasure is, you need to, at some stage, to find what do you think is valuable in the score? What do you love in it? And that will be the story for you. And then you can look for the best way of telling that. Experimenting with different dynamics, tempos is also very, very good. But for me, trying to play different have led me some strange places. Wasn't necessarily great. So you can be try to always be honest towards yourself. Do I really like it this way? Then it's right, even how strange it might be. But if you do it, for other reasons than that, it could lead you. But it could maybe be also fun. I've heard violinists who plays absolutely shockingly different, and it's entertaining.
We've had a question from the Facebook live stream from Ola. Hi, I am an RNCM alumna and I played for Henning a couple of times whilst at the RNCM. I would like to ask him how he balances his life as a musician and that of a person. Has he ever felt that, for example, he was practicing too much or not mindfully enough, and therefore his well-being was at risk? If so, how did he deal with that, and what advice would he give to musicians with coping with finding this balance?
Yes, this is a very, very good question. And of course, to find that balance is not easy, but the nearer you get to a good balance, the better. So at times in my life, I've been sort of way off a good balance, and I've been suffering. And either I spend too little time with my family, I spend too much time, working all the time. Maybe I didn't exercise. And now, to be able to do most things, I see what can be combined. So some of my heroes, for instance, Brahms and Beethoven, they said that they composed best when they were walking. So I decided, because I got sort of sick of just sitting composing, to see what type of my ideas could I develop while walking. So I would improvise something or play an idea, record it, bring it out in the forest and walk. And I found that my thinking was much clearer while exercising. Then I wrote an article, which is in English and also available at Klassisk Quarantaine, about improvisation. I can send you the link afterwards. And I decided to write that article while on a stepping machine. And this article took me 2 weeks to write, and I actually was physically in much better shape after that. And I also think I thought better thoughts than I would have been thinking if I had been sitting writing the same article. So first, make a list of all things you want to do, then find, is there some things which could be bettered by being combined? Could you sort of discuss the ideas for an article while you're walking and talking with a friend, for instance? Then you can do 3 meaningful things, and maybe the result will be even better than doing all at a time. But again, speak with my wife, and before deadlines of my composition, I definitively work too much. So I think I haven't managed to find the balance, but I think getting closer to a livable balance is way better than it used to be before. So, but combining things has really been the things which really helps me. There is a lot of things which can be combined. So, for instance, combining practicing intonation and scales and shift while improvising is much less boring than practicing scales the old way. So there is possible to do many of your things you need to do in a more inspiring way. So anyway, my advice, look at the things, make a sort of short list of what is most important for you, and is there things you currently neglect which could be incorporated, making the things you need to do maybe even better.
Thank you. Our next question is from Ellie.
Hi, Annie.
Hi. Yeah, it's been really nice to talk, listening to you talk about like meaningful stuff, and also about how you learn the score at the piano. I was wondering if you ever do any kind of mental practice, like thinking about the actual technique of playing your instrument, but away from your instrument, like kind of like imagining it, if you will. Or if you have any thoughts on that.
Yes, was it Ellie, which was your name? Yeah. So, yes, actually, it's a very good question. And I do this type of what in the sports world would be called visualizing, but I do it with the audio, so audio visualizing. I don't know if that is possible to say as a word, but that can help me in many situations. For instance, when I go to a new concert hall or a new orchestra to play with for the very first time, I very often ask to see the hall the day before the first rehearsal, because then I bring the hall with me to the hotel room as part of my practicing with or without the instrument. And then thinking that I am in this hall, thinking that I play, that this is a type of mental practicing, I would say, which does help me a lot. And also, it can also bring you to sort of the next level, because part of you will think, oh, I'm scared of this place or something like that. But then I try to think, oh, how wonderful would it be if I could really do how I dreamt about it? And then I get in touch with a part of myself I usually are not in touch with while practicing. And then when I remind myself about what I found in the audio visualize way of practicing while doing the normal practice with the instrument, that is actually the help, because I've already felt how I would like it to feel before I had it on the instrument. But I also do some sort of, we call it in Norwegian, autogenic training also. So sometimes I also just am still and just feel my body. I feel the different part of my body to get sort of in touch with the body, which helps also against sort of stress. So I can do that sometimes even before doing thinking. So again, sometimes I have problems waking up in the middle of the night when I'm stressed. I don't know if you have ever had that problem, like before the rehearsal. I had it I'm leading a Mozart symphony here in Kristiansand, as well as playing my own piece. And I woke up very early, and before I started to freak out when I wake up 5 in the morning and, oh, I need to be rested to the rehearsal, and no, I cannot sleep. But now I sort of have started to greet this as an opportunity. Oh, I'm suddenly awake 5 o'clock, and then I go through the piece I'm going to play direct in the rehearsal in my mind. And I find that can be some of my best practicing. So whatever I before used to sort of think, oh, this is so terrible, I think, what can be the resource of this situation? So if you are at a place you don't want to be, what could be the resource in this particular situation? And then the audio visualizing of not only how it will be to play it, how I currently want it, but sort of dramatizing it and thinking it to the next level. So it's a very, very good question, and I use it a lot. Yes.
Our last question from the Zoom room is from Anna. Do you use or have learnt any techniques for getting into a state of flow or concentration when on the stage performing, or for practice as well? Or do you use any relaxation techniques? If so, do you think this is necessary for performing musicians?
Well, this question had a lot. So the question about flow, this wonderful situation where you just, things happen, and this can be various ways to get into this. And what has helped me is actually a book I would like to recommend all who has not read it, and it's fairly well known. It's called The Inner Game of Tennis. What is not as known is that he wrote two other books called The Inner Game of Work and Inner Game of Stress. And The Inner Game of Stress and Inner Game of Work are also fantastic books. Then he was co-writer of The Inner Game of Music, but sadly this is not equally good, even though it has some useful tips. I think part of the pleasure for me is to translate The Inner Game of Tennis to my situation, not having it translated already by a musician. So I'm able to find. So this talks a little bit about this situation about flow. So and to get into that flow, what is the most helpful for me is the improvisation. Absolutely, because there is, while improvising, no time to think. Thought needs to be sound, and coupled with sort of not caring about if it sounds good or not until it sounds good. And then sort of let yourself, I played a mistake. I mean, don't evaluate yourself while playing. So what killed me before was the self-evaluating of the process. So for those of you who have read In a Game of Tennis, that would be self-one talking. So, but the improvisation is letting self-two out. But lately I've been thinking that we have one extra step more than the athletes. So the athletes who are good ice skaters or runners, and they talk about this flow situation. But we have this extra level of meaningfulness. So we can even make the mistake part of the beauty. So in the art world of acting and playing, even your doubt, even the not being part of flow can be that edge or scar or something to connect with the real feeling. So the storyline, the flow can help you, but even if somehow doubt sneaks in and you start on stage to self-doubt, try to be honest and real, and this vulnerability, that's a difficult word. This, I think, flow is good, but the flow described that you after a concert don't remember how it was because everything went according to plan. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the sort of the meaningful flow where self-one and self-two are equally part of it. So is it possible to have intellectuality and feelings not destroy each other? There is a sort of part of musicianship always shouldn't be intellectual. We should just be playing from our feelings. I sort of agree with that. But the intellectual part is also part of me, so I want to do that. Most people, when trying to get both of them right, gets too clever, and the analytic part of the brain, you analyze your score with a lot of chords, and you start to think too much about that. But analyzing and still trust your feeling at the same time, there are examples, and Bach may be the best. There is no difference between being intellectual at the level of Albert Einstein and still be able to speak freely from your heart as a musician. And speaking about Albert Einstein, most of you probably know that he was an amateur violinist. But what maybe not all of you know is that some parents asked him, we would like our children to become really, really, really good in science. What should we do to encourage them? And he said, well, you should tell them fairy tales. And then the parents said, yes, this is good advice, but what more should we do? And then he said, you should tell them more fairy tales. So this, I think the interesting thing is that the creative part, which we musicians sort of are so essential in what we do, is actually underrated in today's society. So I think the most clever mind in science, which are the one which moves the world ahead in various ways, which can help save the world, they are actually more akin to us artists. So they're not the one who sort of studies all the equation and gets really, really smart and analytic. They are actually very creative, like Einstein was. It's a creative part of him which did all the great discoveries. So I think it's very, very important, this advice. And luckily for my 3 children, I tell them stories and I invent stories to them. So I would tell stories and follow this advice and try to tell stories to someone if you can. Read stories. This is the greatest help.
I can really sympathise with storytelling and the piano being 2 elements that have really had a great impact on your musical life. I sympathise. I think the piano element is something I can go back to now. It's a brilliant idea of using that and improvisation to feed into violin practice. My final question is, what is the main piece of advice that you would give to a student graduating this summer and entering on into the professional world?
Well, it's maybe not so easy to sum up everything, but there is a question in this Inner Game of Work, I think, this book, where he asks, what do you want? And what do you really want? And to find out what you really want in life is not necessarily what is expected from you. It's not necessarily what will bring you the most glory and the most prestige, but you should not ignore it. So while I was doing my sort of studies at the academy, I had in Oslo, I had a dream, which I have told a few people about, which was quite interesting because I woke up, I dreamt that I was sitting in the room, in the cantina of the academy, and then a madman with an axe come in and he chopped off my arm. And I woke then happy with this thought, oh, now I could compose and everybody would think, oh, and he didn't even give up even when his arm was cut off. And I still didn't dare to compose at that point. I was too much just into playing at this stage. But I kept remembering because this dream was so vivid, I couldn't forget it. And it was the subconscious trying to tell me a thing. And then at some stage, I knew that I needed to really take the composing part of it seriously because this is what I want, even if it meant doing less prestigious things and concentrating on something where sort of was the immediate goal. So find out, what do you really want? So if you really want to play Brahms sonatas, play Brahms sonatas. If you really want to compose, compose. If you really want to be an author, try to do that as well. So one thing is what you are currently doing, and this could lead many places. But whatever, if you are honest to yourself, is there something you can do every day to move closer to something you think you want? And this is what helped me then with the composing, because I had scheduled so many concerts, but I didn't have scheduled any compositions or any reason to do that. So when I was stressed up, I always had something to practice to. So I knew with myself, I needed to put some deadlines for myself. So I needed to get some, I wanted to compose and I wanted to not be able to escape from it. So deadlines, if you think you want to write some short story, well, tell your cousin that you're coming in the Christmas to read aloud this short story in such a way that you will be embarrassed, so embarrassed if you don't write a short story that you will actually write a short story, and that can make it happen. So try to sort of put goals, and it can work for anything. I grew up when people say, what you haven't learned when you're 30, you will never learn. And that was sort of a truth which it had power over me. So I thought, once I turned 30, oh, shit, my life is over. But I had this dream to record and play all the Isaïe solo sonatas. And then I decided with myself, I'm deciding this is not going to be true. So I called a fairly small festival in Norway where I had enough influence. And I said, can I schedule in 1.5 years and now a concert with all the 6 solo sonatas by Isaïe? Yes. And they printed it in the program and it was, online. And I couldn't escape it. And I was swearing, hating myself. Why did I do that? But still, I learned them. So deadlines for something which is your dream. not what you expect your parents, teacher, or anything. And it can work on small scale, large scale, doesn't matter. So sometimes even writing a small duet in 1 week, playing it for 10 people can be more meaningful than playing in Royal Albert Hall for 6,000 people. So take yourself seriously, ask yourself what do you really want, and then start to moving in a direction. And you can, of course, always change the direction if you suddenly find out you want something else. But if the gap between what you really want and what you actually do becomes too big, then you could end up being as frustrated as I was, say, when I was 32 and I knew I had hardly written any pieces the last 10 years. Then I decided I need to change that. So what actually helped me, then I invited myself on coffee to a very well-known author who wrote 24 texts to me. And I composed this piece, Equinox, to all of these texts. And since he wrote it, and I was almost surprised that he wrote this text to me, it would be such a shame not to compose it. So it actually forced me, and it also got me the deadline at the actual festival. So I don't know what each of you really want in life. And if you are very lucky, you know it already yourself. If you don't know it at the moment, start looking, start daydreaming. Everything actually starts with daydreaming. What you think is impossible, you daydream it. What if it wasn't impossible? So the most unusual thing is actually trying to do what you really want. A surprising number of people who try what they really want actually succeeds. So it's the trying which is the sort of... I don't want to regret when I get 80 or 90 years old the dreams I didn't follow. So there is an inspirational talk with this author, Denzel Washington, which I can recommend also, where he talks about that. And he mentioned a very good picture. He said that once you are sort of at the end of your life, all the ghosts of all the possible use you failed and you didn't try for. This is how he thinks about it. So I found that I would rather embarrass myself trying something I truly want than think that I didn't even try. Maybe it could have been possible.
Thank you. This has been really inspiring and encouraging, and you've been so generous with your time. I think I've certainly really enjoyed it, and I think we all have. So thank you, Henning. And thank you to everyone who's been on the Zoom call and everyone who's watched via the other live streams. Thank you very much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, well, thanks, Caris. And this was absolutely fantastic for me as well. Very, very inspiring. And thanks for all the good questions. And nice to see quite a few of your faces at the same time. So for me, this was absolutely wonderful.